Day 574 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another super quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a quick look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on just shy of 274,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 520 in the past 24 hours. And remember, this is specifically KIA reported figures and does not include wounded in action, of which I'm sure many trolls, online internet trolls, will really dislike me for saying. But stick around till near the end of the video and I get into that in a bit more detail. Then as for hardware losses, 7 tanks, 17 APVs, and our mouth-wateringly whopping 34 artillery systems. And do bear with me today, guys, as I've had some celebratory drinks that were forced onto me, you know, so they say. Anyway, moving on. So let's move across to the Russian map today. And as Russia claims that the shooting down of several drones over the Belgorod and Orol oblasts occurred. And it's interesting because we always hear about a lot about the 3 Russian oblasts directly bordering Ukraine. So we're talking Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod. But not so much the Orol Oblast, or a bit of a roll of the tongue the way it's pronounced. But I'm butchering it, of course, but my best would be Orol, without so much French involved there. But given that it sits just behind these 3, it was only a matter of time before we heard about it more and more in the news. Then we'll bypass Ukraine and head all the way down to Sochi today. So a large diesel fuel reservoir has caught fire in Sochi itself. Now, the explosion occurred around 5 a.m. this morning, followed by local Telegram channels reporting of a drone strike. And Sochi, of which might sound familiar to you, as it was the location of the Winter Olympics, where it was revealed that Russia had been, in 2014, where Russia had been involved in a state-sponsored doping scandal program, which involved the manipulation of urine samples to conceal the use of banned substances by Russian athletes. And I'm getting into all of that from all of the past because it was almost a decade ago that happened, and yet here we are still with the classic Russia just as we've ever known them before. Lying, cheating, stealing. Then we'll head across to the main map today as Ukrainian air defenses shot down 17 out of 24 Shahed drones overnight, mostly in the central regions of Ukraine, including Sumy, Kropivnitsky, and Kremenchuk, which is in the Poltava Oblast there, where Russia had reportedly hit a Ukrainian oil depot. What do you know? So no confirmation photos of yet that I got just prior to doing this video, but in any case, it's an extremely rare event which occurs maybe a few times a year. I can only think of 2 times this year, including this one, that it's happened to Ukraine. So you gotta put these things into perspective and context sometimes, guys. Then we'll head across to the Donbass. Since the recent success of the AFU liberating and securing Klishchivka and Andrivka, which is approximately 8 kilometers or 5 miles from south of Bakhmut. So this tactical success now brings Ukrainian forces closer to the T513 road, or in some cases switches to a highway there as it moves in the southerly and north direction from these 2 recently liberated locations. However, what is more concerning for Russia right now is defending and keeping the Russian-controlled railway line, which in some areas is actually on the front contact points. In fact, if we zoom in right here, we'll in fact see it there. It sort of touches along there, as you can no doubt see. Therefore, rendering it useless in terms of supporting Russia in this region, which in turn is a devastating blow for the Russian war machine that just loves running off rail. It just creams over it. And so, because of all of these recent unfortunate events for Russia, they have in fact chosen to concentrate roughly 50,000 troops in the larger Bakhmut region alone now. Which may therefore in turn mean we will see more of an attritional meat grinder process, just like in the prior Bakhmut/Wagner days, which I'm sure many of you will remember. I think there was a mathematical equation that came out for that one. I shouldn't laugh, but it was, what was it? Per every meter that Wagner gained in Bakhmut. And they were very good at what they did, but it wasn't a great way they did it. I mean, they were the best of Russia, right? So per every meter, or yard approximately, they lost about 200 men. Oh my goodness. Can you just not great. Pyrrhic victories. And that's kind of the point, really, because Russia will do anything to keep this political win, which is Bakhmut, I guess, quote unquote, albeit a very Pyrrhic victory at that. But consequently and subsequently, they had to divert those additional troops from somewhere else. This 52,000 that they've now moved to the Bakhmut region, which may mean we'll see some surprise gains at locations just north and south of here. I'm fairly somewhat sure in this slightly inebriated state that places that we've never seen before just get pushed forward. Can you imagine it? Horlivka, or maybe even Avdivka in a way there. In fact, moving on a little bit, because the AFU wasted no such time in this direction, as just after the liberation of Klishchivka and Avdivka, they, east of the railway tracks for Klishchivka in particular, the Russian infantry were continuing to be targeted. Ouch. Then we'll head across to the southern lines for the day, see what's going on. So here we go. So in Novodonetsk. Now, hard to see. I'll zoom right in. A bit of a frontline situation here. There was more footage confirming the AFU presence in this area, which confirms earlier reports that it was believed to be contested. And if we scooch across just a tick, there was also fighting near Novomayorska as well. And if we scooch the other direction just a tick, Priutne as well. So reportedly a lot of fighting going on. Not a great time for the Russian time, as reported by the Russian side, I should say as well. I don't trust the Russian politicians, but every now and then, if it fits, yeah, definitely the Telegram channels on the Russian army side. Yeah, it just makes sense, and it fits the profile of what's actually happening on the ground. But just to reiterate, this guy right here, I'll add him in post-production, would not trust him with a 10-foot pole. And I like to attempt to be pretty mindful. I hope that is not just an Australian terminology there. Then we'll head right across today, so the Robotina axis. Now, no confirmed map changes for the day or two, let's be honest, that's okay, these things happened. But there are unconfirmed reports of the AFU as being only about 2 kilometers away from Kapani, which is not as far as the maps would have you think right here. Just not updated enough. Should be more of a grey zone, I suspect, right now. But we do wait for a bit of that confirmation. And apart from that error message there, it does make a lot of sense. And I talk about this quite a lot in the past. So we'll see this. It's almost actually a protrusion of a front line. So, pardon the alcoholic burps there. It's in fact, they call it a salient point, right? So that means that the Ukrainian forces absolutely stationed around here, and of course around here, they can just target this from every direction, and this gets chopped out as they move closer to Kapani. So that's probably what's happening based on these early reports. Then moving a little bit south, explosions were reported in Tokmak and Melitopol. Perhaps no surprises there. all as Ukraine has been edging in closer and closer, or as Bodanov would say, deeper and deeper, as the AFU continues to move up its artillery pieces, platforms, to get in more effective range of these locations. And especially as far as Tokmak is confirmed. Now, let's get specific on this one. In fact, let's zoom in quite a bit. So, Tokmak is now within 20 kilometers range of the actual recent new gains there for the Ukrainian forces. Let's be a little bit liberal there and click onto it. So about 22 kilometers based on how that shows. Whereas it used to be, I'll see if I can move this across, above 25, closer to about 30 in a sort of a safe direction there, which previously made a number of 155 millimeter AFU pieces or artillery platforms just a bridge too far to cross that distance in the past. But now they can engage with these new artillery pieces, whatever they may be, the M777s. I don't know right now. I'm not exactly in the right state of mind, but you get the point. All making for a very tactically advantageous position. They nuzzled their way into around this location there. Then in the south, the Ukrainian forces continued to chip away at various Soviet-era Russian hardware, it's always the Soviet-era Russian hardware. Or should I just say the Soviet-era hardware? It's nothing before, most of the time, it's nothing before 1991 with the whole dissolution of the Soviet Union, that sort of thing. So starting off, a Mr. S 152mm howitzer, was a goner. This one being stationary and actually destroyed by the Ukrainian SSO units with the help of HIMARS strikes, or as we like to say, the GIMLARS strikes there. Then also a BTR-80 Russian armoured personnel carrier was taken out. And then last but not least, two. So a BMP-1 and a BMP-3 Russian infantry fighting vehicle was taken out as well. Then we'll move across to Crimea for a moment. We actually ended up getting some nice close-up stills of the $300 million worth of destruction that was the Russian submarine, the Kilo-class Rostov-on-Don, which was destroyed there. A total write-off, as you can really clearly see with the pictures now. All in the Devastopol dry docks. Or should I say Sevastopol dry docks. Devastopol, though, that's certainly got a nice sounding ring to it. Just devastation. Note to self, in post-production, make some sort of basic meme on that. Then for the entire region of Crimea, I think Forbes put it best when they said that Russia had 5 S-400 defense batteries in the peninsula, yet, as of the last 3 weeks, 2 were blown up. And for a country with apparently the best and most air defenses in the world, 5 is not a lot for this region. Or should I say 3 now instead? And of course, there's never any shortage of memes about this online, my own and many, many others as well, basically stating or asking the question, what air defense doing? Then we'll head across to some news for today. So the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, or UNGA, was underway with Ukrainian President Zelensky arriving on the scene along with many other heads of state, but not Putin. Or, of course, he is locked down. If he visits New York, or something like 123 out of 187 sovereign states, those countries are obligated to arrest him. And maybe not so surprisingly, China's Xi Jinping as well didn't make it to the event. They sent their delegations instead, for instance, the foreign ministers or the secretary of states, depending on your region. And naturally, Zelensky had a few things to say. For instance, expressing that Russia was attempting to weaponize global food shortages as a despicable act in this war. Also, that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an existential threat to the global rules-based order. And he also called for Russia's nuclear disarmament, which is really only possible after Putin's gone. But hey, these things happen sooner than we ever expect. I know we'll all wake up one day, probably sooner than you think, and say, whoa, that really just happened overnight. Putin's gone. Which reminds me of probably waking up to Prigozhin and Wagner storming all the way to Moscow, just 200 kilometers from it. But back to the news. What I liked even more than any of that, was just prior to the General Assembly, where Zelensky appeared on 60 Minutes. I believe that was likely the United States version. Quite an export TV show. So, stating that if Russia, now this is important to me, let's put on my serious, sober voice if I can, stating that if Russia fires at Ukrainian energy infrastructure this winter, then Ukrainian forces will immediately respond in kind, which is very interesting because if Russia... Or let's see, so is Russia really ready for instant karmic retribution on this sort of scale? I'm going to submit that they are not. And you might remember last winter when Ukrainian energy infrastructure was hit. In the beginning, Ukraine was quite slow at fixing it. But after not too long, around December, January time, Ukraine was able to get energy restoration within as little as a few hours in many areas. But we're generally talking 3 to 12 hours, which is just impressive, really. But I've got to say, is Russia's ability to take care of their existing infrastructure, if it were to get hit, the same? I bet that it is not. It's extremely unlikely that they'll have the sufficient equipment or prowess to restore energy utilities in that impressive time rate. That's such short span of time. What's even worse for Russia, in my humble opinion, is, and you might probably think this too at this point, is that I, and perhaps we, genuinely don't think they're even preparing for that sort of outcome. This is the problem with Russia. They've always been quite reactionary in the way that they work, whether it's the army or the MOD extension, the political apparatus, Putin himself, who lives in this imagination bubble of BS, which I normally say he just doesn't have the situational awareness on the ground pretty much anywhere. And if he does, it's always delayed information. So, therefore, there's a chance there will be a lot of Muscovites in the dark this winter, many of whom will be getting pretty angry at their leader, I suspect. And sometimes, I've got to say, don't hold Russians to such low account, not all the time. Particularly the major capitals, Moscow and St. Petersburg. There's lots of footage of them online just being interviewed. Usually the younger generation, some of the older generations in the streets of Moscow and other places, just when they're asked a political question, their first response is, they're very well trained, I've got to say. They say either A, ooh, this is a political question, I don't want to answer it on camera, or B, I'm not political, which is really the same answer, because they know, and they dislike the actual political setup, the whole shebang of the political situation in Russia. And many of them are quite skeptical. Now, not the babushkas. I've seen some very, very old babushkas that have lived through many wars. And they're like, well, they say, this is just BS, current leadership is crap, this is wrong. But when you reach that sweet spot of about, now just in Russia, obviously, but about 55, 60 to 75, let's say 55 to 75, the largest support base for Putin. But their pensions will run out because of this war, sooner or later. I'll do a later follow-up video on that one there. But when you pull the pensions from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is actually used to assist with the pensions of Russia, so when you pull the pensions from the pensioners in Russia, that's Russia's support base lost. And then the really young especially, they just don't want a part of what Putin is doing. And that's the truth. That's why I feel sorry for a lot of these. To be honest, I'm not very fond of the volunteers, the military volunteers, which are only a fraction of the population. Then let's start to close this video off as I continue to rant in my slightly, quote unquote, inebriated state. So let's move across to a mobilization blunder. And I know you guys love this. So for another Russian military mobilization blunder of sorts, hopefully you don't think I'm squeezing this one in, because it's not, although it's not your typical standard blunder segment, it is perhaps the biggest blunder of them all. Now, hopefully I can do this justice right now, but from a Forbes report citing and a Reuters report citing Russian accounting figures, Russia spent $160 billion, now we're talking US dollars, billion US dollars for its war in Ukraine, of which this includes $26 billion in compensation for the families of the deceased soldiers, which is quite a deadly figure, given that Putin decreed much earlier in this war that families of those deceased soldiers get roughly $68,800 US dollars. This figure changes. Let's just put it to 60,000 or 60K US dollars there. So do the math for yourself, and this actually equates to roughly 360,000 eliminated Russian soldiers in Ukraine, which is much more than the Ukrainian conservative estimates. But that's not all, because another 21 billion was allocated for wounded soldiers in Ukraine, where they received roughly 40,000 or 40K apiece themselves. Again, do the math, and you are approximately looking at another 500,000 wounded Russian soldiers in battle. Now, the general rule or consensus might be that you've got 3 wounded to 1 KIA, but the fact that 360K is fairly close to 500K makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I've seen some really dark footage of the Russian army not retaining, let's say retaining, a lot of their wounded soldiers. They're just, to put it nicely, beating them with a stick. But 360K and 500K here. So, as with everything in life, it needs a bit of context. That being, this doesn't even include the many soldiers that Russia has either A, simply not counted, or B, classed as AWOL or MIA or deserters, as they like to call many of them, or others that they consider, or officially on the books, to still be in Russia itself. Which actually saves them a few bucks in the process, as abhorrent as that may be. Truly a compassionless society that has to and will change eventually. Now, I also have some supporting news regarding about 250,000, 250K death notices issued by Russian families of the deceased, but I'll leave that for a later video soon. But the point is, it does tie in with the figures that I just mentioned. Then let's move to a bit of a lighter segment. If some of you found that a bit dark, I mean, I'm sure a few of you may have found that not so dark. But in a lighter segment, just a quick video of the Ukrainian boys doing a bit of breakdancing to once again exemplify their ongoing high morale. What a bunch of champions. And they've got high morale because they've got something to fight for, put simply. It's not like many Russian soldiers that have very convoluted reasons when they're caught POWs as to why they're in Ukraine in the first place. And many of those guys are just besides themselves to the fact as to why is Ukraine treating them so well? 3 meals a day, warm bedding at night. Good on you, Ukraine, for sticking to the Geneva Convention, which I knew you would anyway. Then in a couple of super quick funnies to round this off, if you haven't been laughing at me this whole time anyway, is so the first one, Ukrainian soldiers of the 15th Brigade of the National Guard captured Russian trenches near Verbova in southern Ukraine. And what they found was, well, just monstrous. Putin. And it's a sort of a reverse funny, this one, because how terribly degenerate must the Russians be to put this picture on the wall after a year and a half of dying for this twat? But I do like to be fair to some of the nice Russian folks, which I am sure somewhere do exist, because we haven't seen a lot of this. In fact, I don't think we've ever seen this before, and I've been covering this for a while. So I'm thinking a couple of military volunteers and diehard Putin supporters made this happen. But it could have just as well been the next upcoming P target that they never got a chance to P on. And I'm a glass half full kind of a guy, so I'm going to think it was the next P target instead. Then in a final funny to round it all off for today, guys, so a 400-pound plus mammal was spotted at Russia's SeaWorld just the other day. There was also a walrus on display too, as Kim Jong-un looked on at the walrus, as it was doing something that Kim will never do: sit-ups. And so this was one of the last events on Kim's 6-day trip to Russia in support of Putin's tyranny. And interestingly, it was quite symbolic of a choice for locations for Kim to visit, I've got to say, given that this particular aquarium has been previously dubbed a death camp, which saw 15 animals die in just 3 years, and not of natural causes. But also, yes, this kind of actual proper light-hearted funny, to see a walrus doing sit-ups, it's just nice. So thanks for watching today, guys. I'm quite sure I'll put a disclaimer on this video to maybe even not watch it. But for all of the folks that generally like my show and contrastingly did not like this one, just say simply, I forgive you in the comments. Although, fingers crossed for me, perhaps 1% of those edge cases will say, wow, that was extra funny. Fingers crossed. So thanks for watching again, guys. Thanks again for all of the support. I do see it all the time, and I always comment where I get the chance to. Yeah, thanks again. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.